Hello, my name is Christian, and welcome to my YouTube channel where I talk about games in gross detail. The following video will contain spoilers for Final Fantasy VII Remake and potentially some for the original game as well. If you wish to not be spoiled, it might be a good idea to turn back now. In addition to this, I've already made an in-depth analysis video on Remake's first chapter, so if you haven't watched that yet, it might be a good idea to watch that first. I personally believe the first chapter of Remake to be a strong starting point, as it is well executed and only adds story and character moments that serve to flesh out the overall experience. Other than a few small changes, it also stands as fairly faithful to the original, with only small details added pretty much always to the player's benefit. If Chapter 1's primary goal was investment, then it seems like Chapter 2's is to provide larger context to further justify that investment. Up until this point, assuming you've never played the original game, one's knowledge of Midgar as a whole should be very limited. At this point, we've only been introduced to the Mako reactors and a small bit of both the upper and under plate through a cinematic cutscene right when you boot up the game. Chapter 2 directly throws you onto the streets of Midgar with a moral dilemma on the mind, while also doing much to teach the viewer about Cloud's past, or at least hint at it. In terms of the actual explosiveness of Chapter 1, it definitely doesn't feel like Chapter 2 lives up to that potential, but at the same time, I don't think that's the potential it was going for. This chapter seems to exist to try to familiarize you with the characters a little bit more. However, before we get to all the complex concepts that appear in this chapter, the game places us right back with the party escaping the chaos of the explosion they think they just caused. Barrett notes that the mission was largely quite successful, but everyone is curious about the bomb. Obviously, they don't know that Shinra blew up the reactor themselves, and Jessie notes that she didn't expect the bomb to have this huge of an impact. Big says that what they have done here must have helped the planet, but he says so shakily. The game is already planting the moral dilemma of Avalanche into the head of the player. Is it truly morally good to perform acts of undeniable terrorism if it may have a positive effect on the future? The game mostly doesn't give the player an answer, but allows them to come to their own conclusions with the context given. After this, we have a small playable segment where really you just walk in a straight line avoiding rubble and squeezing through small cracks in the wall. Just want to note that this game has a lot of these sections where you have to shimmy through small spaces like this. Jessie blows a hole in the wall to get the party out back to the streets of Midgar, and what they are greeted with is nothing short of mass hysteria. Portions of Sector 8 are being burnt to the ground due to the detonation of Jessie's bomb. At least that's what the party thinks, even though it was actually Shinra. All the members of Avalanche show concern and anxiety from this mess because as far as they know, it was them who caused it. Following this is a fantastic scene with Barrett, where he notes that he understands his friend's empathy, but this is something that has to be done for the sake of the planet. Regardless of this pressure, he will always be there to help them. In Remake, Barrett is shown to be so much more than the character we knew from 1997, and his speech here really drives that home for the player. Barrett is shown to be one who is very sensitive, but also one who is built to lead. He always has to plan on a smile and guide his group in the right direction even when they are having doubts. He genuinely cares for them and wants them to feel comfortable because he is by their side. It's a small moment of empathy that humanizes Barrett and cheers up the rest of the party. After Barrett's speech, they set their destination for the 7th Heaven Bar, and Barrett tells Cloud he will get paid there. There's a short materia tutorial here with Jessie. Nothing particularly worth noting happens here, but Cloud tells Jessie that survival is about a mix of skill and luck, but the only one of those things that you can rely on is skill. Very ironic coming from Cloud, for sure, given his past. Running around Sector 8 proves to be an upsetting experience though. As you run past people to move forward throughout the city, the NPCs are clearly heard talking to each other about how the reactor bombing is already affecting their lives. This is a good change for the narrative of 7 overall. Questioning the morality of our main characters was something the main game didn't give the player enough information to accurately assess. Essentially, Shinra bad, Avalanche good. And I think for the original game, that setup was fine, it worked. However, in this case, the actions of Avalanche aren't really good at all. They're strikingly reckless at best. Just looking at the chaos that they believe they've caused seems to already change their opinions on the situation greatly. Of course, we have to note that Jessie's bomb isn't what did this, it was actually Shinra, as the president was the one who ordered for its destruction following the bombing run. Nonetheless, this plot point does not undermine the moral dilemma that Avalanche is always facing in these scenarios. They believe that these were their actions, and that's all that is required to force them to question themselves. Anyway, Cloud traverses through Sector 8, further bringing us to another cutscene. This scene is the first major part where Remake largely diverges from its source material. The buildings burning from the bombing run trigger Cloud to remember the slaughter of Nibelheim. I love the transition shot that shows Nibelheim on fire too, just the way Cloud is standing in the middle of it. It makes him look really helpless and vulnerable. Then we get a shot of who he is looking at within the flashback, which is Sephiroth. He snaps out of this illusion and steps forward, only to bump into Sephiroth once again. Now, I want to discuss how Cloud is tormented by Sephiroth in Remake. I know a lot of people really don't like the change of seeing Sephiroth so often throughout the game. In the source material, Sephiroth was like an untouchable god, not only in the sense that he had this overwhelming sense of power, but also in the sense that his appearances were very limited. Even when pursuing him, the party would often only see the destruction he had left in his wake, but never the man behind the act. In Remake, the game utilizes Sephiroth to foreshadow Cloud's trauma from the Nibelheim incident and even beyond that. Personally, I like this take of Sephiroth, as given that Cloud has Genova cells, it makes sense that Sephiroth would have some level of physical and mental control over what Cloud can see. At the same time though, while I do like this change because of the depth it provides Cloud, I also feel that it robs Sephiroth of some of his nuance and mystique. As I noted before, in the source material, every run-in with Sephiroth was a rare occurrence. He would rarely confront the party or Cloud head-on unless it directly benefited him. Overall, I feel that each scene needs to be looked at individually, as some of them feel like they aid the narrative and some simply don't. I believe this one to be the former, one that ultimately expands upon Cloud's character in a meaningful and interesting way. I also think this scene does a great job expressing the panic that the sight of Sephiroth brings Cloud. We learn that Sephiroth has something to do with a traumatic event from Cloud's past, that he killed Cloud's mother, and that Cloud thought he was dead for some reason. Most of these plot points are established later on in the plot in the original, but introducing them early adds a sense of mystery to Sephiroth, and this event that ties him and Cloud together. I do, however, think it's a shame that we do not get Cloud's account of the Nibelheim massacre in this game. As an old-time fan, I love that the game is acknowledging these plot points early on, but for new fans, I could totally see them being frustrated that the whole story isn't covered in this part, and by extension, we don't learn about the Nibelheim massacre. Overall, I think this is a good change. Much of Remake's source material was depicted as a strange type of mystery, forcing you to piece together what happened. At the same time though, while I think this scene overall benefits the story at large, I'm unsure if it directly benefits this part or new players as much. Anyway, Cloud nervously stumbles into an alleyway, muttering that he thought Sephiroth was dead. Sephiroth also drops a new juicy plot detail that he actually killed Cloud's mother. Given what happened at Nibelheim in the original, this honestly could have been assumed back then too, but we never had Sephiroth admit to it. Here he does, and he seems proud of it. It's a simple story change that gives the player yet another reason to hate Sephiroth, even this early on. Sephiroth gives Cloud a pretentious speech about how he needs to run away and live on, but Cloud snaps out of the vision in a fit of rage. After this, Cloud continues through Sector 8, coming upon Loveless Street, a cool reference to the Loveless posters from the original Final Fantasy VII. He sees a strange girl seemingly fighting off empty air when Sephiroth returns again, telling him that he cannot protect anyone. Like I said, I think some of the scenes with Sephiroth are really good, and some are really bad. And while the last one was for sure a positive change to the source material, this one is not. The player gains nothing by having Sephiroth approach Cloud here. We literally saw him 3 minutes ago. This is pointless. I'll go into detail on Aerith's voice actor in later videos, but even in this small scene, I adore Brianna White's portrayal as Aerith. She has a gentle kindness as well as a spunkiness to her, and even this early on, it's great to see. Anyway, Aerith grabs Cloud's arm, and doing so allows Cloud to see the Dementors from the Arbiters of Fate, yeah. Cloud tries to swing at them, but that doesn't work, and all the chaos they have caused around Cloud and Aerith has attracted Shinra guards to Cloud, as they recognize he is one of the perpetrators of the bombing run. Anyway, the Arbiters fly around a bit more and eventually chase Aerith off, leaving Cloud to fight the Shinra infantrymen. Now, I know I'm going to have to talk about the Arbiters at some point, so I'm just going to do it now. Keeping it simple, I like the idea that the Arbiters represent, but their integration into the story is so ham-fisted and corny it has to be the worst thing about Final Fantasy VII Remake as a whole. I don't want to discuss exactly what their purpose is right now, I don't think that is particularly relevant, but seriously, they are just so annoying. It feels so strange that within a game that has such tight writing overall, that these literal Dementor ripoffs just float around and are always being a general nuisance. I don't know exactly how, but there had to be a better way to provide the narrative effect that the Whispers take on without making it feel so cheesy. Whenever they showed up on my screen, I rolled my eyes or groaned because this isn't a divergence from the source material that adds anything to the characters or plot. They just show up, they do something annoying, and then they run off. Overall, I think they're kind of stupid, poorly integrated into the plot, and while I do understand why they exist, I hate that this concept had to be done in such a preachy way. Nonetheless, this might be the most negative I get about Remake for a while, as they don't significantly appear for a bit, and as I noted before, they're literally my least favorite thing about the entirety of what I consider to be a very great game. I know the Whispers were made for someone, and if you like them, that's fine, but I cannot get behind the way they're integrated into an otherwise masterfully written story. Okay, so now that that run is over, we get a playable section as Cloud fighting off different Shinra enemy types, and this part is actually pretty challenging. Most of the enemies are small fry and can be easily taken out, though there are a few more difficult enemies like dogs and the shock troopers. While the first bombing run demands that you understand the basic concepts of battles, I feel this chapter does a fantastic job at helping the player brush up on the skills that they just learned. Instead of getting by through wailing the square button and using ATB for the occasional heal, the game challenges you to use your ATB and options in creative ways. In fact, the boss of this section is one that cannot be hit by regular attacks normally, as he has a giant shield. The only reasonable ways to hit him are to change to Punisher mode and learn to counter, or to use your ATB and magic to cast a fire on him. No matter what route the player takes here, the game is teaching them a new mechanic to take into future fights, whether that be the Punisher counter or the new awareness that finding an enemy's weakness is important. It's actually really quite clever. After defeating this mini-boss, Cloud escapes the Shinra army via jumping on the moving train the rest of Avalanche resides on. Another Shinra soldier seems to recognize Cloud, or maybe his sword, but Cloud has another small mental break preventing him from hearing what the soldier says. The scene doesn't introduce anything too juicy narrative-wise, but Cloud's escape onto the train was one of the coolest moments in the original, and it's pretty cool here too. Following this, we see Barrett and friends in the train waiting on Cloud, seemingly thinking he won't join them for the trip back home. But surprise, he does! Barrett shows some worry for Cloud here too, but then takes it back soon after. It's really quite a funny scene. Even this early on, it's pretty easy to see that while Barrett can be tough and intimidating, he's truly a really caring person. Cloud also asks the party if they've ever been attacked by the spooky ghosts from Harry Potter, but no one in Avalanche has ever seen a Harry Potter movie, so they don't know what he's talking about. Following this, the Avalanche squad walks into the main cart of the train. You have 3 separate small conversations with Biggs, Wedge, and Jessie, but the only one that is truly important seems to be the one with Jessie. She tells Cloud that there's no way the bomb she made could have created the destruction that was seen outside the reactor. She's already feeling remorse and guilt for the chaos she feels like she caused. She tries to come to a conclusion of how this happened, but ultimately blames herself. It's kind of a sad scene given the player knows she actually did nothing wrong. The next scene is an awesome one that fleshes out Barrett even further. On the train, some Shinra office workers are bad-mouthing Avalanche, and one of them actually drops the detail that someone within Avalanche attempted to assassinate President Shinra. This is a detail that never really goes anywhere, but I do think it's at least pretty interesting to hear about. Anyway, the following scene shows the viewer how compassionate Barrett is about his cause. He shouts down to the Shinra workers, calling himself a concerned, law-abiding citizen, telling them that Avalanche is trying to send a message to Shinra. I also enjoy that he shows genuine frustration that people only seem to think of Avalanche as a crazy, moralist terrorist group. Hearing others oversimplify the destruction that was just caused hurts Barrett. He wants the people to appreciate Avalanche and the cause he fights for. To some extent, I would also call his viewpoint somewhat naive, though. It is clear that this response triggered within him by the Shinra workers is one of almost complete anger. Sure, his heart is in the right place, but he isn't a perfect being by any means, and its methods are extreme to say the very least. Once again, this scene lets the player decide what they think about Barrett's ideals, and I really like that. Also want to note that the song that plays here is fantastic. It's a version of the Mount Corel song from the original game, and I love it. Following this, Jessie shows Cloud a diagram of Midgar and describes the route the train takes. This scene is kind of interesting from a world-building perspective, but it doesn't provide much else for the player. Barrett speaks up again, expressing his frustration in the class system that divides Midgar. Essentially, the rich live above the plate and the poor live below it. Cloud tells Barrett if he doesn't like the way Midgar is, he should just leave, and Barrett responds that he would, but he stays in Midgar in an effort to help those who are less fortunate. This scene shows yet another look into Barrett's character, depicting him as selfless, while Cloud appears to be undeniably more selfish. Neither of their ideals are inherently wrong or right here, merely they are just opposing. Cloud ends the chapter by equating the poverty of the people in the slums to the tracks of the train. They can only go where the train tracks take them. Both the trail of the train and the poverty of the slums are predetermined. And that's all I have to say about Final Fantasy VII Remake Chapter 2. Originally, this video was going to be 2 chapters, chapter 2 and 3, and about a 20 to 25 minute analysis, but the more I got into chapter 2, I realized the more I had to say, and it didn't feel right to produce a product that was 20 minutes when I just have so much more to say. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed it. Chapter 3 obviously will come next. I think all these parts, it looks like they're going to be between like 15 to 20 minutes depending on the chapter. But yeah, I didn't want to like skimp out on any details. I didn't want to make this shorter than I needed to, so I just gave chapter 2 its own video, and I made it as long as I needed it to be. So hope you guys enjoyed it. If you enjoyed the video, if you're looking forward to analysis of future chapters of FF7 Remake in the future, maybe subscribe. If you liked it, maybe give it a like. If you didn't like it, leave me a dislike. Have a good one, guys. Take it easy.